Okay, so we're looking at an IELTS Task 2 essay, and it's discuss the advantages and disadvantages, okay, and then come to a conclusion about whether you think it's a good idea or not. So the topic is, in some countries, young people are encouraged to work or travel for a year between finishing high school and starting university, okay? So in the UK, we call this a gap year, okay? So I know my sister took a gap year. There's a lot of different reasons why people might want to take a gap year. Some people are sick of studying. Some people want to travel. Some people want to earn money for when they go to university. So it's quite common in the UK to take a gap year. Okay, so let's take a look at what this candidate has done. It is a well-known fact that some young people spend a year from high school graduations to beginning university studies working or going on a trip. Okay, so they've tried to paraphrase work and travel as what studies working. So they've changed the form of the words, that's fine, or going on a trip. I would say rather than going on a trip sounds so like informal, like, oh, I'm going on a weekend trip. I'm going on a trip to Daegu or something. So I would say university studies working, or maybe you want to say, or traveling abroad. Maybe instead of travel for a year, working or traveling abroad. Okay, so that traveling abroad sounds like a bit more serious and long term rather than just going on a trip. There are both obvious advantages and disadvantages, and those features will be discussed in this essay. I think that's fine. I would say if you want to sort of make a stronger thesis statement, you want to sort of summarize the themes of what that you're going to be discussing. There are both obvious advantages in terms of life experience and disadvantages in terms of university preparedness. Okay, so now you've given me an idea of what you're going to talk about. Those features will be discussed in this essay. Okay, so that's fine. Pretty solid introduction. I would like to see maybe one more sentence. I would sort of suggest adding in a sentence here. But I mean, I think this is perfectly adequate as an introduction. It's like a body one. On the one hand, spending this period working or traveling has apparent merits. Okay, so I would say that's fine. Firstly, people can choose whatever they want thoroughly in this period. You don't really thoroughly choose anything. You choose or you don't choose. You can't really thoroughly choose something, okay? So I think what this candidate's trying to express is that people can choose whatever they want to do. Okay, so firstly, people can choose whatever they want with complete freedom in this period. I think that's what they're trying to say. That is to say, they can be independent in what they do. Before finishing high school, students are under the control of teachers and responsible to study even when they do not want to. This means they can barely feel the freedom of their own choices. This means they can barely feel the freedom of their own choices. Okay, so it makes sense in English, but it's very poetic the way it's phrased. Okay, this idea of you can being able to feel the freedom of your choice is a very sort of lyrical, poetic way to write it. And my first thought when I saw the sentence is this has been translated. Okay, this candidate has thought of a phrase or how you would express it in Korean, and then tried to directly translate it to English. So I think, my first thought when reading this is that they're sort of, this candidate is thinking in Korean still and translating and writing that down. Yet by choosing to work or travel at this time, they can be more responsible to what they decide. They can be more responsible. They can learn to take responsibility for their own actions and decisions. I think that would be a better way to phrase it, rather than saying more responsible to what they decide. Okay, so this is in terms of task achievement. Okay, this is totally fine. They've sort of explained what it is that is the advantage. Okay, second advantage. Also, by doing this, students can mitigate the stress which study gives. This can mitigate the stress which study gives. Again, this sort of a slightly odd phrasing. Again, I think this is sort of semi-translated sentence. Can mitigate the stress which they may have felt from intense studying and academic pressure. A great amount of stress about school activities and study. School activities and study has been accumulated to students. So accumulated is kind of, it has a very sort of passive feeling. Like you've just kind of gathered stuff kind of unintentionally, but it doesn't really fit. The meaning doesn't really fit into the sentence. School activities and study, a great amount of stress about school activities and study has been, I mean, is it in the past or we're talking theoretically, right? And a great deal amount of stress about school and study can be carried by students. And then I would give an example, particularly in South Korea, whose educational system fosters a strict competitiveness. Okay? So something like that, okay? I mean, I just picked South Korea as an example. You can pick whatever country you want. But now you're sort of addressing the task achievement because now you're adding in a more specific example, which is important to do in IELTS. Okay, in order to fully explain things, I like to see you back up your ideas with an example. You could even give a statistic or a number or something if you wanted to say like a recent study by the Korean Herald newspaper found that 75% of South Korean students felt a great amount of stress over their academic results. So consequently, they may think that they want to be free of learning something. Too vague, don't say something. They may want to be free of learning, or they may want to be free of an academic environment for a short period. This period can be therefore regarded as a refreshment for students. Okay, so that's kind of the same. Again, I feel like some of these sentences to me feel like they've been translated from Korean again. So on the other hand, there are some drawbacks in terms of using this spare time. Okay, first and foremost, if the time they use is not considered as a valuable year, it would turn out to be a time loss. Again, this sentence is giving me the feel of it's a Korean phrasing, but just changed into English. If the time they used is not considered as a valuable year, is not considered as, so you're thinking at it, so it doesn't make sense. If the time they used is not thought of as valuable, it would be a time loss. But what does it matter if you consider it valuable or not? Like, is it valuable or not? If the time they used is, so I would sort of have an idiomatic phrase in here. If they do not use the time wisely, it may turn out to be simply a wasted year. Okay, so then we've got our phrase, use the time wisely, is kind of like a sort of more idiomatic expression. Okay, so we would never, naturally in English, we would never sort of say as a valuable year. It would turn out to be a time loss. The time they used is not considered as a valuable year, as a very odd sound, because I think it's a direct translation from Korean, is my feeling. For example, if the work somebody decided to do is banal and boring, okay, nice vocabulary, I like the word banal. The time spent on doing that work would become the worst time. The time spent on doing that work would become the worst time because this person would get neither time nor value. Time. So this sentence to me is confusing to read, okay? So if you decide to do boring work, you don't get anything, you don't get time. Do they mean like refreshment time or like relaxing time and they don't get value from it? But I mean, can you say you don't get value for it? Maybe you get money. Maybe you're doing a really boring job, but they pay you a lot of money, so you save money over the year. So I don't think this is really a good explanation of what they mean. So I think I would pick a better example here of how you could waste your gap year. So maybe you could say something like, if they don't use the time wisely, it's a wasted year. Some students intend to get a job but are not active or proactive in getting the job. Some students only work part-time and then waste time, having fun rather than being productive. Or some students work during the gap year but then spend all their money, so it's not being very productive for them. Okay, so I think they need a better example here because this final sentence doesn't make sense. Last but not least, working or traveling for this period can have a detrimental effect on academic performance. University studies are all based on the level of learning at high school. The whole knowledge which students learn from high school is extended to university studies, and only when this makes a synergy can academic abilities develop. Again, I like the use of the word synergy. That's a nice vocabulary word that they've tried to use. But again, this sentence gives me the feeling of it's a translated sentence. Just because the phrasing and vocabulary choices are slightly odd. The whole knowledge, we would never say whole knowledge. We don't ever say I have a whole knowledge, I have part knowledge. We wouldn't necessarily say whole. We would just say everything students learn in high school relates to what they will study at university. Okay, so that's a much more natural way of phrasing it. Is it which students learn from high school is extended to university studies, and only when this makes a synergy can academic abilities develop. Okay, so this I guess this part is fine. I like the word synergy, so you can keep this part. However, by stopping learning, young people may forget the knowledge learned from high school, and this can irritate them when they learn something new related to high school. And this can, is it irritate? Irritate kind of means annoyance. Okay, is it annoying when you've forgotten something in high school? I don't think that's quite the correct phrase. You don't want to focus on the students' feelings. You want to focus on their performance. By stopping learning, young people may forget the knowledge learned from high school, and this can disadvantage them when they learn something new related to the high school curriculum in university. Okay. In conclusion, for young people, working or going on a trip in this time gives some advantages when it comes to freedom of studying and their decisions. However, it may lead to bad results regarding the loss of time and a serious influence on academic performances. Okay. So this conclusion is okay, because what I like is that they've given me a nice sort of summary, and they've tried to paraphrase their arguments they made in the essay. Okay, one mistake students tend to do in the conclusion is they just repeat or they just list back again exactly what they just said, but they've actually tried to paraphrase a little bit. Okay, in terms of what their overall message is. But again, this regarding the loss of time, vague. What does that mean? How much time? Time to do what? Why are we losing it? Okay, so there needs to be a clearer way of doing that. So you might want to say wasting time rather than losing time. Okay, I think wasting time is the phrase they want to go for. So overall, this whole essay gives me the feeling of someone who's got a good knowledge of English. They've got some nice complex sentences. They've got some good vocabulary. It's mostly pretty clear and understandable. They have paragraphs. They're focusing on the question. But the overall feeling is someone who's thinking in Korean and then translating from Korean to English. And that is always going to sound unnatural when you do that. When I'm reading it, it feels like someone who's a non-native speaker is writing it, which is fine. I mean, no one's expecting perfection, but it's just the phrasing and the word choices feel strange. And I think that's because when you translate from Korean, you're still having the exact sort of Korean phrases tend not to translate with the same meaning to English. And so some of the vocabulary choices are weird. I feel like they might have used a sort of online dictionary or thesaurus to try and get some vocabulary ideas. And so it comes across a little bit strange. So in task achievement, they did thoroughly address both sides of the debate about it. So I would want to give a 6 for task achievement. In terms of coherence and cohesion, it was pretty logical. They were pretty consistent. But the linking phrases were okay. I would sort of want to give them a 5.5. Vocabulary, again, was okay. Sometimes inappropriate and vague, though. So that would sort of go down to a 5. And in terms of grammar as well, just too vague, okay? So this student needs to work on sort of making their ideas more vague. Less vague. And one thing I would recommend for them to do is just to read more in English. And when I say read more, not just IELTS texts, okay? Go on websites, find blogs, or watch YouTube videos, or listen to podcasts, and more natural English, not just kind of exam preparation, because sometimes you can get stuck in this idea of just exam preparation English, and you don't really have a feeling for how native speakers use English. So the more you read that's naturally in English, the more you listen to things that are in natural English, the more instinctively you'll start to be able to think in English and phrase things to sound more natural, okay? So that's really what I would advise this candidate to do. And I know it's quite difficult to find stuff that's at your level, and it is difficult. But just every day going on to the BBC website and trying to read one article in English, or going on Reddit and trying to sort of read some articles in English, or finding some YouTubers who you like and following them and trying to follow along. It's really difficult at first, but it's really going to help you get a feeling for how people speak in English. And that's really going to help your writing, because then you're going to stop thinking in Korean and translating across, and you're going to start thinking more naturally in English. So, I mean, overall, I think this is probably coming out at a 5.5. I mean, I could see it coming out at a 5.0. But I think I would probably put this as a 5.5 because I did like the structure and they did go into a lot of detail about the pros and cons.